What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Bush coming at you solo today to discuss my number one buy in Dynasty Fantasy Football at the running back position. Now, I'm going to be talking today about a guy that I feel very strongly about is going to increase in value, increase in fantasy production if you acquire him now. Let me know if you guys want me to do this for the other positions. I'm sure I can come up with my number one buy at quarterback, wide receiver, and tight end, etc. In our Dynasty Rankings Manifesto, I have this player ranked as my RB6 overall, available to patrons. If you guys want our Dynasty Rankings Manifesto, you can get it in the link in the description down below. I get a bunch of DMs all the time of people asking me how to get to the Patreon. It is linked in the description of all of our videos, and it is also pinned in my link tree on Twitter. If you guys want to follow me over there, my Twitter is on the screen right now. You can also access our Dynasty Rankings Manifesto by using promo code FSE on underdogfantasy.com at sign up and first deposit. As a free gift, you'll receive our Dynasty Rankings Manifesto for free. So if you've been following the channel for a while, I'm sure you guys know who I'm talking about. I'm sure you guys are going to be, not surprised at all when I reveal who the player is. But if you're new to the channel, stay tuned and I will reveal him soon enough. So if you guys enjoy this video at any point, like, comment, subscribe. Now let's hit the intro. Okay, so on the thumbnail, now I'm not sure if you guys were able to tell who it was by the thumbnail because there is some clues, his number and stuff like that. So on the thumbnail, I'm sure you saw that I have this player's size listed. I have the fact that he was an elite prospect. I have the fact that he had elite efficiency and plays for an elite offense. So with those clues, maybe you're able to figure it out, but let's break down the prospect profile of this mystery player because this mystery player is still quite young. So his prospect profile is somewhat relevant. So the mystery prospect, we had a mid-second round pick who posted a 99th percentile Spark athleticism score. So we got a high draft pick who's a very, very good athlete. He ran a 4.32 at his pro day, did not test at the combine the year he came out. 96th percentile weight adjusted speed score at 5'10", 209, 210 pounds. He has prototype size at that, BMI 30.0. If you guys are BMI guys, just 23.2 years old, 9 months younger than one Najee Harris, who's a top 5 dynasty running back. So it is time to expose who this player is. I'm not going to keep you guys waiting for too long. It's Baltimore Ravens running back J.K. Dobbins. Now, I'm going to cover every part of his outlook. This is going to be the most in-depth J.K. Dobbins spiel you guys have ever heard in your life. So back to his profile. J.K. Dobbins, coming out of Ohio State, received top 55 draft capital. He went to a huge school like Ohio State, where he had 3 straight 20 reception seasons. You guys can see his college target share in the 59th percentile at a big school like Ohio State is very, very good. Capped off by a 2,000-yard rushing junior year. And he dominated the offense in 2019 as a junior, despite competing for, touches, volume, whatever you want to call it, with guys like Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, who are both in this draft class, Jamison Williams, who went to Alabama after he came from Ohio State, but was on that roster and was commanding targets for that team. KJ Hill, who was already in the NFL as well. Justin Fields, who was a big-time rushing threat at quarterback. And Master Teague, pre-Achilles injury, was also quite an exciting young freshman. So J.K. Dobbins, we have, again, a pretty bulletproof prospect profile, in my opinion. He was my RB2 coming out. I had him just behind Jonathan Taylor as the only 2 running backs in the 2020 class with first-round grades for me. They both had late first-round grades in my grading system. But here's the important thing. Since I'm attuned to the fantasy space, I am aware that there's some J.K. Dobbins slander going around in these streets on some other channels. I'm not going to name names, but I know that J.K. Dobbins is getting slandered right now. And when I'm comparing him to a guy like Travis Etienne, for example, who I also love, we need to look at the whole thing because with Travis Etienne, all we have to go off of right now is the prospect profile. But with J.K. Dobbins, we have a year of him being in the NFL. So here's what he showed us in his NFL career so far, which is, in my opinion, way more important and relevant to his already elite prospect profile. The prospect profile is still relevant because he's a young player, but what he's done in the NFL is more indicative of future success. So what he accomplished in his rookie season is something that went very, very under the radar, and I think a lot of people have forgotten about it by now. J.K. Dobbins had over 6.1 yards per touch in his rookie season. Now, wide receivers, we don't usually like to look at, efficiency stats and stuff like that. But for running backs, it is usually indicative of more volume because at running back, you're at the mercy of the coaching staff. A wide receiver, you can typically create your own volume by getting open and commanding targets. But for running backs, you're at the mercy of the coaching staff and the usage and things of that nature. So speaking of being at the mercy of the coaching staff, J.K. Dobbins averaged 6 yards per touch in his rookie season on less than a 50% opportunity share. He was sharing the backfield with Mark Ingram, who was still there. He was sharing the backfield with Gus Edwards. Justice Hill was mixing in here and there. And he averaged over 6 yards per touch as a rookie on less than a 50% opportunity share. Only two other running backs since 2013 have accomplished this as rookies. David Johnson in 2015 and Alvin Kamara in 2017. Both of those running backs finished as top 3 running backs in fantasy points per game in their second NFL season. Now, obviously, we were robbed of J.K. Dobbins' second season because he tore his ACL, and I'll get to that in a little bit. And that's a fun stat, and it's anecdotal and all. But does it actually mean anything, right? Does the fact that he shares that stat with Alvin Kamara and David Johnson actually mean anything? I think so, based on a couple premises. Number one, coaches are very hesitant to trust rookie running backs. So the fact that J.K. Dobbins needed to be efficient and prove that he was going to be in line for a big workload as a second-year player, which I think we started to see at the beginning of the preseason before he tore his ACL, that's one of the biggest things for coaching staffs. Number two, when players prove to their teams and coaching staffs that they're good players, they are typically rewarded with more volume. Now, there were 3 running backs last year coming into 2021, and I wrote an article on the Fantasy Scouts, which you guys can still actually go look at. It was called Don't Overthink J.K. Dobbins, DeAndre Swift, and Antonio Gibson. Entering their sophomore seasons, all 3 of these running backs averaged over 5 yards per touch as rookies. And like I said, J.K. Dobbins was actually over 6 yards per touch on less than a 50% opportunity share. So they were efficient rookie players, but they didn't get a ton of opportunities. DeAndre Swift, Antonio Gibson, and J.K. Dobbins were these 3 players. As expected, Swift and Gibson saw a sizable bump in their volume because we have the luxury of knowing how they did in their sophomore year, and we don't have the luxury of knowing how J.K. Dobbins would have done. We can go off of their numbers. Antonio Gibson went from 12.1 carries per game as a rookie to 16.1 carries per game as a sophomore player and 3.14 targets per game to 3.25 targets per game. Good for a 62.6% opportunity share, a near 20% increase of his share as a rookie. And again, we had Antonio Gibson dealing with injuries all over the place. Might have even been higher had he been a little bit more healthy entering the season. And similarly, we had DeAndre Swift. DeAndre Swift had 8.77 carries per game as a rookie, 13.7 as a sophomore player, 4.38 targets per game, up to 6.7 targets per game as a sophomore player. Good for a 58% opportunity share, about a 10% increase on his rookie season. He also left games early with injury on Thanksgiving, and he also played in a limited capacity towards the end of the season for some context to those numbers. So the point of all this, right? What is the point of me going through all these numbers? The point of all this is the same thing would have happened to J.K. Dobbins this past year had it not been for the injury. Now, the situation would have lended itself to a much better outcome than the already pretty good outcome that we got from DeAndre Swift and Antonio Gibson this year. I had that trophy behind me isn't going anywhere because I had both DeAndre Swift and Antonio Gibson on my fantasy championship winning team. Then we get the peripherals of the situation, right? The J.K. Dobbins situation is far, far better than those guys. We go back to a study that I did before last season as well. What matters for league-winning fantasy running backs? I did a video back in June of last year talking about the peripherals of situation and volume-based factors. We already discussed some of the volume-based factors with J.K. Dobbins right now. They are attainable for J.K. Dobbins, but just how good of a situation we have is what we also need to focus on with Dobbins. We have an already elite scoring offense that has scored nearly 30 points per game anytime Lamar Jackson has been the quarterback since 2019. As you guys can see, in the games that Lamar Jackson has played, the Ravens offense are scoring nearly 30 points per game compared to 20 points per game when he has not played. So we have a young running back who was extremely efficient as a rookie, attached to an offense that was top 3 in rushing last year, despite losing both of their top 2 running backs, J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, before the season even started. So an elite rushing offense without their top 2 running backs, they would have been nuclear this year had they stayed healthy. We also have an offensive line that ranked top 15 in run blocking for each of the past 5 seasons, despite, especially this year, losing a guy like Ronnie Stanley to injury for a number of games and stuff like that. So very good offensive line that can deal with injuries. The ghost of Devontae Freeman was productive in this offense last year. And not only that, Devontae Freeman was actually a top 20 running back in fantasy, RB17, in the games that he was the starting running back. When he first joined the team, he was, hovering around 13, 18% of the snaps because he was still learning the playbook. But once he hovered around 50, 60%, and we saw him take hold of that starting role, we saw him actually take off and be productive for fantasy as an RB2 that you could throw into your flex spot or in and out of your lineup. And again, this guy is certified washed. Devontae Freeman has not been a very efficient or productive running back in a couple years. He was only averaging 4.3 yards per carry in a system that typically I could average 5 yards per carry in, running behind Lamar Jackson. He is not a 23-year-old running back with 4.3 speed like J.K. Dobbins. He is not a guy that averaged 6 yards per touch last time we saw him on the field. He is not a guy that scored 9 touchdowns his rookie season on only 150 touches. Now, it's not all sunshine and rainbows for J.K. Dobbins in Dynasty Fantasy Football, because I'm sure you guys right now, if you don't like J.K. Dobbins for Dynasty purposes, you're screaming at your screen right now, Bush, what about the ACL injury? What about the lack of receiving work with a mobile quarterback like Lamar Jackson? I'll address both of those concerns. The first one, the ACL injury is concerning. I'm not going to deny that the ACL injury is nothing, because it is something. Jamal Charles in 2012 was the last running back to finish as an RB1 a year after a torn ACL. So this is not an ideal situation that J.K. Dobbins is in, but here are the facts in J.K. Dobbins' favor. Number one, he underwent a successful ACL surgery without any setbacks on September 7th of 2021. That gives him nearly a year to get back on the field for week 1 and nearly 11 months to get back for the start of training camp in preseason. So he has a lot of time to recover. This is not the Saquon Barkley situation where Saquon Barkley tore his ACL in mid-October, didn't have the surgery until early November, and therefore his recovery was 2 months behind the timetable that we're going to have for J.K. Dobbins. We also have the fact that J.K. Dobbins is only 23 years old, and this is the first major injury he's suffered since he fractured his fibula in high school. So this is not a guy that has been relatively injury prone, if you guys want to use that term. Saquon Barkley also had a compound tear as well. And the one thing that is a little bit concerning for J.K. Dobbins is this was a contact ACL injury. Normally we see them as non-contact, but again, I'll have, a doctor on the channel at some point to talk about J.K. Dobbins' ACL tear and some of the things that we can, diagnose based on a medical perspective. Dr. Edwin Porras of Fantasy Points wrote this in the write-up for J.K. Dobbins on December 26th. A 23-year-old running back with relatively high draft capital coming off of an ACL tear in August. Where have we heard this before? Again, probably referring to Saquon Barkley. Dobbins should be back for week 1 without issue. There's reason to be optimistic about his 2022, but don't overexpose yourself. So he has some concern, but he's not, going to the bank, sell this guy, get him off your team. He's a complete bum. The only thing that is keeping J.K. Dobbins' price at RB15, according to DLF ADP as of March 2022, is the ACL injury. That is really the only thing that I have as a concern for him. I have no doubt in my mind that had he not gotten injured this past preseason, we're talking about a guy at minimum in the Antonio Gibson range of fantasy or Dynasty Fantasy Football startup drafts, and probably in the Javonte Williams, DeAndre Swift range of Dynasty Fantasy Football startup drafts because of the situation he's attached to and because of what he showed as a rookie. Now, to the other concern, I'm sure a lot of you guys don't like J.K. Dobbins because Lamar Jackson doesn't throw to his running backs. And in my opinion, for starters, fading players specifically from one arbitrary narrative like this is never a winning strategy. Could it be true? Could he not get a lot of targets because Lamar Jackson doesn't target his running backs? For sure. But the talent of the player supersedes that one concern that you have with J.K. Dobbins. Now, two, back to the point about Devontae Freeman. Devontae Freeman played 5 games last year in which he was the starting running back and Lamar Jackson was on the field playing because Lamar got injured towards the end of the year. So I don't want to count any time we had with Tyler Huntley as the quarterback. In those games, he saw 4.4 targets per game, which is about 75 targets on the season. And again, we're talking about washed up Devontae Freeman, not J.K. Dobbins. If you examine the games where he was out running routes as well, which J.K. Dobbins will be doing once he is back out there, he was commanding targets. J.K. Dobbins had a 91.7 route participation with the first team offense in the preseason prior to his ACL tear. Again, it's preseason. Do we want to take away too much from that? I don't know, but it's all we got right now. We have a guy that was running all of the routes with the first team when he was last seen on the field. And Devontae Freeman, when he was barely cracking 50% of the routes, which is not nearly the 91% that J.K. Dobbins was cracking, 3, 6, 8, and 5 targets with Lamar Jackson on the field. In my opinion, J.K. Dobbins is poised to do what DeAndre Swift did in 2021. And the crazy thing is that the receiving upside is really just a bonus for J.K. Dobbins. He can be an RB1 simply by being efficient, 60% snap share type of running back, sharing the backfield with Gus Edwards and Lamar Jackson, but he's in a top 3 rushing offense like Mark Ingram was back in 2019, who finished as an RB1. And even if Gus Edwards still commands a good amount of carries, there's enough to go around for J.K. Dobbins. Nearly 400 carries for Ravens running backs the last time we had Lamar Jackson on the field for a full season. So that's the median projection, right? We have a guy that can finish as an RB1 without the receiving work. The starting running back for a great offense has 12 rushing touchdown type of upside, still commands a good amount of carries, even with Gus Edwards there. And he has 4.3 speed. So he can also break off a number of big plays as well, like we saw from DeAndre Swift this year. That's the median projection, but his ceiling comes from his ability to basically be DeAndre Swift, except in the Ravens offense instead of the Lions offense, an offense that'll score nearly 150, 200 more points than what the Lions will score on a season basis. Lamar Jackson doesn't throw to his running backs. You are correct in that statement. He hasn't done it historically, but it's basically the same narrative that we had for Cam Newton before Christian McCaffrey got into town. Lamar Jackson doesn't throw to his running backs because he doesn't have a running back worthy of throwing to. Dobbins had a very good target share in college, coming from a noted mobile quarterback like Justin Fields. It's not just mobile quarterbacks don't throw to running backs. It's mobile quarterbacks won't throw to running backs unless they have a good pass catching running back. Cam Newton never threw to his running backs until 2017. In 2017 and 2018, he had Christian McCaffrey. In that time period, he was fifth in the NFL in targeting in the running back position because he finally had a dude like Christian McCaffrey who can contribute as a receiving back. By now, I hope I've tempered most of your concerns for J.K. Dobbins. It's not a slam dunk. Nothing in Dynasty Fantasy Football ever is because of the injury, but there is a very high chance, in my opinion. And remember, we were on DeAndre Swift last year when a lot of people were off of them for similar, lazy type of narratives, that Dobbins will ascend into the second tier of Dynasty running backs this time next year, even into the first year potentially with a guy like Jonathan Taylor. If he can have a healthy 2022 season, which is the only concern I have for him is his health, then this is a dude that I'm going to be very, very in on Dynasty Fantasy Football purposes. Now, if you want to wait a couple months and see what J.K. Dobbins' rehab is looking like, if he's back on the field, if he's not suffering any setbacks, then trade for him at that point, by all means. But if you want to get the discount, you got to buy him now. Of course, you guys probably know how I feel and how I'm shopping a lot of these veteran running backs like Nick Chubb and Dalvin Cook and Joe Mixon and Alvin Kamara and all these guys. I'm shopping these guys specifically for guys like J.K. Dobbins, specifically for guys like Travis Etienne and guys like that. I am willing to bet that you can get J.K. Dobbins plus for a few of these guys. If you wanted to sell Joe Mixon right now, you could probably get J.K. Dobbins in a second round pick or J.K. Dobbins and a young receiver or something like that. And if you're wondering why I'm shopping those veteran running backs, I'll link the Sell These Running Backs Now 2-part series in the cards above me. So if you want to check those videos out after you're done with this one, you'll understand why I'm selling those other guys. That is the rationale behind pretty much everything I'm talking about. So again, hope you guys enjoyed this kind of in-depth look at J.K. Dobbins, my number one buy at the running back position right now in all formats, but specifically Dynasty Fantasy Football. Like, comment, subscribe if you guys enjoyed this. Like I said, if you want me to do this for wide receivers, I'm more than happy to do that. Check out the Patreon for more Dynasty content. Link down below. Like I said, a lot of you guys DM me on Twitter asking how to access the Patreon. It is linked in the description of all of our videos, and it is also linked in my Twitter bio in my link tree if you guys want to follow me over there at Football Stock. Peace out, guys, and I'll talk to you soon.